Now, when I say the phrase GW has been focusing on the Alpha Legion a lot, don't get too excited because that doesn't mean they're gonna suddenly pop up in a large-scale narrative arc. It just means that GW has released some books within the last 6 years, which in all fairness is a lot more than can be said about a lot of other factions.
That's right, Peter. I'm you, and you're me, and this is a gun.
Hi, I'm Chrono the Harlequin, and I'm in several Discord servers of people who hate and talk shit about each other very aggressively because I am the Alfarius. Now, before we get started, a few things. First off, thank you so much for watching this video, and please subscribe if you have not already done so. And to those of you who have subscribed, a huge thank you because we just recently broke 30,000 subscribers on the channel, and more importantly, we just broke 31,014 subscribers, meaning I am the Horus Heresy. Also, it should be noted that I did have this video in the works for a while now and did launch an audience poll asking if this was the video I should make or a different topic. However, just a few days ago, Major Kill did release a video of essentially a similar topic, so I just want everyone to know that's not my fault. And now getting into the video proper, for a while now, it's been known that the Alpha Legion is probably one of my favorite legions, not just because of their theme, but also because of how much fun it is to speculate on their motives and their history, both in the Heresy and afterward. And this is probably my biggest theory regarding the Legion. I think I did actually cover it briefly in my video about the fate of Omegon, which was generally met with, "Oh cool, an Omegon video." What do you mean it's an hour long? Yeah, that's something a lot of people actually said. They didn't realize it was that long, and I didn't mean for it to go that long. Also, funny thing, in Major Kill's video about other Warhammer YouTubers, some people in the comments did mention me, and one person who did mention that I am, quote, one of the few people who truly understands the Alpha Legion, which honestly I don't think I understand them all that well, but hey, that was really flattering. Okay, getting back on track. Alpha Legion Civil War. So, some background information is probably what most of you already know, but for those who don't, this might take up a fair amount of the video. So, if you're already caught up on the history of the Alpha Legion from around the Heresy and a little bit after, go ahead and skip to a more relevant chapter in the video. But for those who want a quick refresher, here goes. So as you know, the Alpha Legion actually has two Primarchs, that being one Primarch with both a shared soul, Alfarius and Omegon. The first one, Alfarius, was found on Terra, and was adopted very early on by the Emperor and Malcador, presumably immediately after the scattering. However, he spent very little time with the Emperor himself and was mostly raised by Malcador in secret, because he was meant to be, quote, the sword in the dark, who could, quote, uphold the ideals of the Imperium even if both the Emperor and Malcador were gone. Which, yeah, they are basically now. And the second one was found in the later stages of the Great Crusade. This was the one who had the pale spear and the iconic suit of armor. However, he seems to have mostly grown up alone. These two would be, while generally on the same page, not have always the same goals. And this really comes into play when the Heresy begins, or better yet, before it begins, on a planet called Nurth. Because on this planet of Nurth, the Alpha Legion would be called in to help the 63rd Expedition, who was having trouble dislodging a culture that was resistant to Imperial compliance known as the Nurthine culture. They were actually warp-tainted and were being used as an example of the dangers of the warp by a group known as the Cabal. Now, the Cabal, as many of you know, was a Xenos organization comprised of many ancient member races. Well, representatives of those races at least, such as the Eldari, something that's implied to be the Slann, and many others, who were all dedicated to the eradication of chaos. They manipulated events and had their operatives, namely a certain someone, in order to get the Alpha Legion onto Nurth and show them the true destructive power of chaos, and then set up a meeting with them. This meeting wouldn't exactly go as the Cabal planned, but they did get their sit-down, and managed to convince the Alpha Legion of their goals. These goals being, let Horus win the Heresy, so that when he takes over the Imperium, his inner noble spirit comes through, allegedly, and the Imperium ends up burning itself out in a catastrophic series of civil wars as he sort of leads the species to ruin out of guilt and ineffectual leadership. This would result in the extinction of humanity, but life in the galaxy would be preserved because chaos would be starved of their main food source. because humanity is far and away the most numerous species in the galaxy, and is decently psychically active and prone to at least stronger-ish emotions. There are other species that are more susceptible to chaos, but they're just not as numerous. So humanity would be sacrificed, but the galaxy would live on free of chaos. And Alfarius, believing he knew best what the Emperor's ultimate intentions were, sided with the Cabal after they showed him visions of this possible future, stating that he knew the Emperor's ultimate goal was the defeat of chaos. And the reason Alfarius felt confident in saying this is because we would learn later on in the book Alfarius, Head of the Hydra, that Alfarius was actually found by the Emperor first, not Horus Lupercal. And normally that would be that. The Alpha Legion would turn traitor, fight against the Emperor, lose after the Siege of Terra, and then have to basically go into hiding. However, this complicated situation was further complicated in true Alpha Legion fashion by the fact that they went with something else called the Third Path, or a theory that is known as the Third Path, wherein one twin would fight for chaos, while the other would fight for the Emperor. We don't have many specifics about this quote-unquote Third Path, but it really does seem to be the case because while most of the Legion would act one way, doing traitorous things, and on sometimes seemingly acting of their own initiative, there would be secret operations within the Legion that were clearly loyalist, such as destroying an Alpha Legion installation, yeah, one of their own installations, under the pretext of plugging a security breach, and because it was giving some of the Psykers at that station preternatural vision that could possibly make them see what the whole thing was going on. And I guess if the whole thing became clear, their cover was blown, yada yada, read The Serpent Beneath, it's complicated, which would also drag the White Scars into the conflict because that station had been stopping news of the heresy from reaching them. They would also seek to provoke the White Scars into fighting by attacking the Space Wolves. Funnily enough, when the Alpha Legion boarded a Space Wolves vessel and were cut down, one of the Space Wolves would look over a dying Alpha Legionnaire and demand to know, why did you do this? Why are you doing any of this? And he looked at him and said, in all seriousness, for the Emperor, before dying. Eventually, they would seemingly formally break with the Cabal after the events on Deliverance, wherein, after letting the Raven Guard remnants escape the planet, they would basically airlock their Cabal representative and seem to go their own way. Also, this whole time they would prepare for every eventuality by burying a bunch of Space Marines underneath the Imperial Palace, all hypno-coded to respond to different key phrases that would trigger various actions within them. Some could be fight for the Emperor, some would be fight for Horus, some were focused on chaos directly, some were just leave the system and vanish entirely. Everything was prepared for with code words and hypno-coding because the Alpha Legion was big on this. Furthermore, when one of the twins died, I believe it to be the second found one, on the Battle of Pluto fighting against Rogel Dorn, the other one would take full command of the Legion. And that, I think, was also the death knell for this play both sides thing and caused them to fully commit to the Loyalist effort, though in their own Alpha Legion way. To this end, they released several Alpha Legionnaires below the Imperial Palace, and gave them the directive of waking up those legionaries in support of the Emperor. However, one of these Marines, namely First Captain Ingo Peck of the Alpha Legion, was hijacked psychically by a powerful Psyker named Octay, or Cyrene, the Blessed Lady of the Wordbearers who is now a Perpetual. And she tried to force him to go with the condition that would cause him to focus on chaos and seize control of it directly, because she believed that she could steer Horus toward chaos and cause him to take control of it, because she saw herself like Erebus as a hand of destiny. Her plan was really stupid, but she did manage to hijack the first captain of the Alpha Legion, and this actually resulted in him killing another Alpha Legionnaire sent to instigate the same Protogol, that being Matthias Herzog, one we had met all the way back in the book Legion. Legion is kind of a necessary read as of the End in the Death Volume 1, and I think probably even more necessary when we get to the End of the Death Volume 2. But like, truth be told, I don't mind because it was a really good book. There seems to be a misconception, by the way, that Matthias Herzog was meant to instigate the condition of loyalty to Horus. That's not true. I don't know why people make that mistake in their videos, but I guess it's because people aren't as obsessive about this as I am, or as invested in this storyline as me, so I don't fault anyone for it, but that should be noted. It is the fact that Matthias Herzog was meant to instigate loyalty to the Emperor, and it makes sense the Alpha Legion would send a few legionaries into the most secure place in the galaxy, and probably the most dangerous active war zone in all of human history, to go and do this important task. Now, the last we know of Ingo Peck is that he is immobilized beneath the Imperial Palace because John Grammaticus attached a motion-activated sticky mine to the outside of his armor, one that would absolutely be able to kill him. And he did this at the request of Ingo Peck indirectly, because Peck said, "Hey, I'm being controlled, I need you to take me out of the equation." So John obliged, out of their quote-unquote old friendship, even though they met each other one time in one book that took place 14 years ago. Now, past this point, regardless of what happens, we all know how this ends. The Alpha Legion fails, the Emperor is interred on the throne, the traitors are defeated, and they have to flee the system. Well, technically they were never in the system, but what assets are there need to get the hell out. However, it is known that the Alpha Legion do not flee into the Eye of Terror along with the rest of the traitors. It's implied that there are some elements there, but we don't know how many, or if they're Heresy Era or newer ones. And continuing on with this theme of things we know about yet are still also in the dark about, is the Battle of Eskrador. Now, it's understandable that some of you might not know exactly what the Battle of Eskrador is. Well, to explain briefly, after the Horus Heresy was over and the traitor legions fled, the Alpha Legion didn't head into the Eye of Terror immediately, and instead started wreaking havoc in the galactic east. Then, this would all come to a head on a planet that we don't know the location of, called Eskrador, where the Alpha Legion would bait the Ultramarines into open battle, to quote-unquote prove their superiority and really stick it to them. This was where Alfarius and Guilliman would finally face off. But Guilliman would surprise the Alpha Legion and Alfarius by going off the script and being more unorthodox than they expected, managing to kill Alfarius in single combat. However, they didn't retreat like he expected. He believed that no legion could survive the death of their Primarch on the battlefield, but they rallied and the next day started hitting the Ultramarines really hard. The Ultramarines would eventually give up and leave the planet in order to bombard it from orbit, thereby making it their victory. However, Guilliman would comment that there's a lot of caves and tunnels, so most of the Legion probably did survive that bombardment, but he was just so sick of fighting them at this point that he left to go deal with other matters, getting his throat slit by Fulgrim being one of them. Many people, myself included, don't believe Alfarius, or in this case Omegon now taking the name of Alfarius after the original one died on Pluto, actually fell on Eskrador, and instead might have used his Primarch ability to give some of his blood to one of his Legionnaires to drink, thereby turning them into an exact replica of him. Because they can do this, and will often send that Legionary on a suicide mission so they'll die immediately after drinking the blood. This is coupled with the fact that when a Primarch dies, there is a bright flash of light, but there's no way for Guilliman to have known that. Now, I've said in a previous video, we're not certain if the battle actually happened, but I think it might be pretty certain that it did happen to some degree, because it has so far been referenced in 2 different Alpha Legion books, that being Sons of the Hydra by Rob Sanders and Harrowmaster by Mike Brooks. Both of these are post-Heresy books, as you would imagine if it deals with a battle that took place after the Heresy, and reference Eskador as the moment where the Legion shattered. Now, it should be noted that neither of them have consensus on whether or not Omegon, the second living Primarch of the Alpha Legion, died there, but it is stated that after Eskrador, the Legion did shatter and disintegrate and everyone went their own separate ways. And this is the crux of the Alpha Legion Civil War theory, because after the shattering of the Legion at Eskrador and the disappearance of Omegon, the Legion split up in more ways than one. For all intents and purposes, the Legion would never again be unified and would very rarely undertake operations as a whole. In the words of Solomon Akura, a rising star in the Alpha Legion and could be considered one of the biggest heads of the Legion at this point, the Alpha Legion didn't shatter. More likely, they split apart like fragmentation from a bolt shell, each piece, or warband, lodging itself in the body, or Imperium, and doing damage over time to slowly bring it down. Now, let's consider this the more or less end of the Alpha Legion backstory, and getting into the theory itself. It only took 12 minutes. And because I just mentioned him, let's start with Solomon Akura, and his faction known as the Ghost Legion. And these guys are traitors through and through. Not Chaos Space Marines per se, but some are, but definitely all heretics. Now, this guy is a very new character. We meet him as the protagonist of the book Harrowmaster from 2013 by Mike Brooks. It's actually him who gives us that analogy of the Alpha Legion shattering like shrapnel at the end of the Battle of Eskrador, and he also states that nobody knows where the 2 Gloriana-class battleships of the Alpha Legion, the Alpha and the Beta, are currently located. He says some commander must have taken the Alpha, another one must have taken the Beta, and then they just vanished off. Now, granted, it should be noted, he wasn't at Eskrador. He is very, very young in terms of a Chaos Space Marine. Well, I say Chaos in air quotes because he is a sorcerer, but he does sort of look down his nose at Chaos and isn't really corrupt. But he does utilize it as a tool. And a tool to what end? That being the destruction of the Imperium. He believes wholeheartedly that whatever purpose the twins had for the Legion and whatever their designs were is now moot, because they are either dead or have been gone for 10,000 years. He believes that they're both dead, but either way, he states that now the Legion's purpose is to destroy the Imperium of Man, stating that he wants to tear the beating heart from the Imperium and show it to it, and that if humanity cannot exist without an institution like the Imperium, it doesn't deserve to exist at all. And funnily enough, that's actually a talking point I've seen echoed on leftist spaces within the Warhammer community, that the Imperium is so evil and so corrupt that if humanity can't exist without it, then screw it, humanity should just go extinct, or give in to chaos. Now, that's a pretty debatable point, but you can't deny that it's one a lot of people have. And Mike Brooks himself, the author, is very much a leftist. If you look at his Twitter, it's pretty clear he's got some strong political leanings, so Solomon is his way of injecting his beliefs into the setting, and I don't really mean that as a bad thing. You know, it can be interesting to have enemies of the Imperium come from more varied stances other than just, chaos, 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 chaos. That being said, though, I do understand absolutely why it would turn some people off from the character, and even I'm not a huge fan of him, because I just find him to be a little too savvy, a little too perfect. He does feel like an OC of sorts, and he's just too caring about everybody, he's too competent, he's too witty, and he has insight that maybe you wouldn't expect him to have, though I can't deny he is exceptionally well written, because Mike Brooks is really good at writing Alpha Legion action. He also wrote the Alfarius book, Alfarius Head of the Hydra, and that is universally loved because it is just fucking great. So what makes him so special? Why are we talking about this guy and not whoever the fuck else? Well, the reason is because he is effectively, as I said earlier, the leader of the Alpha Legion throughout the Galactic East. And he does this by basically gathering all the Alpha Legion warbands that would heed his call, which was not all of them by the way, to an asteroid base that is considered neutral ground for all Alpha Legionnaires and their operatives, and basically say, hey, we need to deal with the new threats. The Imperium has released these Primaris Marines, everything's going haywire, so we can either fade into the background, or buckle up and really put ourselves out there, get more aggressive, really go all in. And he convinces the other Alpha Legionnaires that he's the man for the job by basically pulling an Abaddon. By that I mean, he gets his hands on the head of Alfarius' Pale Spear, which had been lost during the Battle of Pluto back during the Heresy, and has been in the hands of the Inquisition. He goes into a sort of cat-and-mouse game with an Inquisitor, and at the end of it, makes off with the head of the spear, thereby using that as a symbol for his new authority and to show how the Legion has changed under his leadership, and also goes on to rename it to the Ghost Legion, as opposed to the old Alpha Legion. I call this pulling an Abaddon because that's exactly what Abaddon does in Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Black Legion series. He fights a clone of Horus, kills it, takes the Talon for himself as a symbol of the new age for the Legion, and renames the Sons of Horus to the Black Legion. He also wants the Alpha Legion to only recruit from the best of the best, because what the Alpha Legion currently does is basically infiltrate academies meant to groom people for becoming Space Marines, and poach the best, most cunning recruits that they can find. That's actually how Solomon himself would become an Alpha Legionnaire. And he says, we shouldn't just be scraping by with whatever we can get our hands on, we should be getting the best of the best because we're better than that. Because the Alpha Legion at present will basically use whatever gear they can get their hands on, and will even welcome in Space Marines who are not of Alpha Legion gene stock and have left other chapters into their fold. Some Loyalist Alpha Legionnaires do fit this bill. He is the epitome of what you would call a new wave, because he's very irreverent towards tradition and authority, such as the old ambitions of the twins, because, he's never met them, and the fact that some members in the Legion do still refer to themselves as Alfarius. The tradition of making themselves look like their Primarch with surgery and saying, "I am Alpharius," has fallen away in recent millennium, but some do still stick to that old tradition. However, Solomon balks at this, because at this meeting of Alpha Legion warbands, one of them stands up and introduces himself by saying, "I am Alpharius," and everyone basically starts laughing at him. Some people go like, "Oh, no, you're not, shut up," or some are like, "Oh, here we go again." It's really interesting to show how the Legion has evolved, especially in the absence of older seniority and leadership, because very few Alpha Legions from the Heresy era are still active or were present at this meeting, because they would all either be some of those ones in the Eye of Terror, or are just off on their own doing their own thing and don't associate with the new ones. This is actually brought up in the book Heromaster because Solomon Akura remarks on the fact that a warband of allegedly Heresy-era Marines, known as the Unsung, pay attention, these guys are going to be really important, are flatly ignoring his call to muster and told him to, quote, "eat the end of his own bolter." And despite them just going full low-tier god on the guy, he's actually fine with it, because he says the presence of Heresy-era Marines would complicate his plans and what he's trying to do here, because they would undermine him. That's a big thing, because it seems like he has all the advantages. He has every card in his corner. He's got the new Marines. He has access to potential Primaris ones if he plays his cards right. He has the Pale Spear. He's got numbers. He's got legitimacy. He has tech priests and psychers and serfs aplenty that are loyal to him because he does treat them well. Maybe a little too well, if I'm being honest. So it would seem like, how can you shake this guy? He's got everything going for him. But that's what you need to remember, is that other Marines would have more legitimacy if they come from the Heresy era, and especially if Omegon returns, because despite all their bluster, a Primarch is a Primarch. You will probably listen. But again, it does come back into play that a lot of the current Alpha Legionaries, especially ones following Solomon into his Ghost Legion plan, are not the original Heresy-era Marines and might not be as swayed to follow Omegon just because he's there. And there's also the hilarious possibility that if Omegon resurfaces, they won't follow him because they just won't believe it's him. Like, we see that in the book Heromaster, wherein a group of Alpha Legionnaires claim, "I am Alpharius," and look exactly like Alpharius, and then they just basically get nearly laughed out of the room before Solomon quiets everyone down. Like, could you actually imagine that going down in a book? "Hey, Alpharius, go get Alpharius, he's gotta meet this guy. It's Alpharius!" And like, nobody believes him because that whole thing of "I am Alpharius" just came back to bite him in the ass. Like, the idea of a Primarch coming back and everyone just going, "Nuh-uh," is really unique, but honestly maybe more cheap narratively speaking. I would kind of not prefer it, but it's too funny to completely ignore. And I would also like to take this time to note that Solomon isn't the only real representative of traitor Marines within the Alpha Legion. An example being the Chaos Lord Arcos, who was present at the Siege of Rax and played a sizable role, and was instrumental in bringing in the Dark Angels into the conflict. Now, some people take this to think that, oh, he was secretly loyal because without him bringing in the Dark Angels by his presence, the Loyalists never would have won the Siege of Rax. That's not true. The Alpha Legion seems to be targeted by the Dark Angels because they tend to know about the Fallen and have Fallen in their ranks. An example of that being the Loyalist Occam the Untrue, who has a small group of Space Marines, all from various genetic backgrounds, but wear the Alpha Legion colors and believe in his ideals of being the quote-unquote Emperor's Test. One of them being a Night Lord, another being a disgraced Relicator, and a Fallen. And most importantly of all, he dies. Arcos, along with his entire warband, are wiped out by the Dark Angels. Now, even if they were Loyalists, they weren't suicidal. If their plan was to bring in the Dark Angels, they would have done so and then gone with an exit strategy, rather than stay and get killed. There are a lot of Chaos Sorcerers and Chaos Warlords who are of the Alpha Legion line and are prone to their scheming and planning. And I feel like many of them, even if they're not directly under Solomon Akura's thumb, would be at least on his side in the event of an Alpha Legion civil war, because they are on the side of chaos and generally speaking oppose the Imperium. But that being said, now's probably a good time to get into the Loyalist aspect of things, and talk about the Loyalist factions that are in play here. The first one being the Sons of the Hydra. Now, I say Sons of the Hydra because they're not actually called that, they're just from the book Sons of the Hydra. They're actually known as the Redacted, and they are a warband of Alpha Legionnaires who view themselves as the Emperor's test. And this is something that is common for some Alpha Legionaries. They view themselves as testing the Imperium and shoring up its defenses by probing weak spots and getting the Imperium to react, or outright purging elements that are too weak to function on their own, but can't be eliminated because of the Imperium's bureaucracy. We can actually see an example of these people, to a degree, in Heromaster. They call themselves the Penitent, because they actually put barbed wire inside their helmets to cut up their faces to show penance for their betrayal of the Emperor's great vision and view themselves as kind of loyalists. Again, Solomon flatly mocks these people, and he even mocks the Redacted by calling them pretenders playing dress-up, because a lot of them aren't actually Alpha Legionnaires. They're from all over, and have been accepted in by the leader of this group named Occam the Untrue, because they share his ethos. And Occam, for his part, is also not a genetic Alpha Legionary. He doesn't have Alpharius's gene seed, but he is loyal to the cause and wears the colors. And by cause, I mean his personal cause. And an interesting thing about Occam is that he is a firm believer in the cult of the God Emperor. He kidnaps a priest and uses him to do confessionals, however the priest commits suicide, so a Calidus assassin, also allied to Occam, disguises herself as the priest and does confessions for him. So as we can see here, Occam has his own advantages if he ever does come to blows with Solomon Akura and the Ghost Legion, because he himself has people he can recruit from and ways to get Marines on side. Furthermore, he has his own connections, namely a Calidus assassin. They're not easy to get. And a big one is his possession of a Catan shard. Those are some of the single most dangerous things you can own in the 41st millennium, and he has one literally in the palm of his hand. How he got it is a very interesting story and says a lot about him, because he and his crew of quasi-loyalist Alpha Legionnaires, who are not actually Alpha Legionnaires, were doing the bidding of a Chaos Warlord named Kitso Carthage, who claimed to have been on Eskrador when the Primarch fell. And it also should be noted that most Alpha Legionnaires aren't sure whether or not Alpharius died on Pluto, or died on Eskador, or wherever, because of the Legion's secrecy and the fact that it's been 10,000 years with basically no records kept. Now, Occam, for his part, actually feels the same way as Solomon Akura, in that he believes the Legion is disparate, has lost its way, and is listless. These are things I think we can all agree on, but his solution is to hopefully find a warlord he can follow who shares his ideals, and he believes he has found that when a Necron approaches him claiming to be in service of an Alpha Legion lord known as the Lord Dominatus, someone that he implies is one of the twin Primarchs, and Occam believes him, going along with his schemes to activate some Necron pylons near the galactic core, as well as just being brought on a sort of wild goose chase. In the end, it is however revealed that this wasn't Omegon, but was actually a shard of the Catan known as the Deceiver, which had been using its influence and its guise as Omegon to gather several Alpha Legionaries, like many of them, to the galactic core for its own purposes, but with its cover blown, it goes on a rampage and destroys many of them. This thing is an absolute monster. It is damn near unstoppable, and they only beat it by tricking it into a Tesseract, a small black cube thing that Occam holds in his hand and has made off with. However, it should be noted that before Occam realized that this was just a shard of the Deceiver, he thought it was Omegon truly, and begged him to take control of the Legion once more, unite the disparate factions, and save the Imperium from itself, as well as cutting away a lot of the taint that had rotten the Legion to the core. Now, where do Occam and people like him fit into the grand scheme of an Alpha Legion civil war? Well, if Omegon returns and unites the Loyalist factions, then Occam would be one of the first to flock to his banner and follow him wholeheartedly. Though he might have a little trepidation and there would be a lot to prove after this whole Deceiver incident. And I'd like to say this outright, anyone who's still operating as a Loyalist Alpha Legionnaire is probably even better at doing Alpha Legion stuff than an actual traitor Alpha Legionnaire, because you have to be sneakier, more prone to long-term planning, more creative, more crafty, more of everything really, if you're going to be a loyalist within a traitor legion. Remember, traitor Alpha Legionnaires can rely on other traitors, but loyalist Alpha Legionnaires are basically alone. So that's what loyalists would have. They might not be pure Alpha Legionnaires like in the case of Occam and the Redacted, but they would be more crafty, more experienced, a lot of them probably from the Heresy Era, and have some tools up their sleeves alongside the Primarch himself. That's nothing to sneeze at, and I think it would put them on even footing with the Traitor Marines and Ghost Legion. You know, the Akuras and Arcoses of the galaxy. But now we get into the Wildcards, because while some Alpha Legionnaires seem to work for the Traitors, it's hard to tell where their loyalties lie, and they seem more like mercenaries. A good example of this comes from the Arcs of Omen campaign, where we see Chaos start fighting itself, and Alpha Legionnaires are on both sides. Abaddon himself employs some of them in order to keep track on elements that he views as maybe not 100% reliable, and that's a fair thing to do, as well as being the spearhead to weaken up locations he wants to take, such as the Rock or Inquisitorial installations. Yet, when he and Vashtor are invading the Rock, they are suddenly blindsided by other Chaos forces led by Be'lakor, who seeks to put Vashtor in his place, and Be'lakor is accompanied by Wordbearers and other Alpha Legionnaires. Now, this could be some long, complex scheme, or them just being very mercenary in nature. I, for my part, absolutely believe the latter, because there is a history of Alpha Legionnaires being just in it for themselves. No grand ideas, no large-scale beliefs or missions, just in it for themselves, doing what they do. Another example of this comes from the book Shroud of Night, with the main character, Cassar, and his legion, the Unsung. Now, the Unsung are interesting because they have been trapped effectively on a demon world for a few years, but when they finally leave it, they realize, whoops, the heresy's over and it's been 10,000 years, and they don't really know what to do. Now, if there's any one group of Alpha Legionnaires who are going to be immediately loyal to Omegon, it's these guys, for pretty obvious reasons. Solomon Akura isn't going to readily give up his power and doesn't agree with probably what Omegon would want to do. Occam is not an organic Alpha Legionnaire, neither are his men, even though they agree with what Omegon would probably want. But Cassar and his men are Alpha Legionnaires from the Heresy Era. They are going to fall in line with Omegon immediately, especially because that means it would better guarantee their safety. One thing about Cassar is that he uses Chaos to a degree only when he needs to and reluctantly. This is an interesting through line because we do see Alpha Legionnaires who are Chaos Sorcerers, and even in Harrowmaster, there are some who have clearly fallen to Khorne, and Solomon Akura looks down on them, because even though he is a sorcerer, he does not worship Chaos in any capacity and even looks down on it, viewing it as just the most effective tool to achieve his goal of burning the Imperium to the ground, and I'm inclined to agree. Cassar, for his part, uses Chaos only when he needs to. He actually has a demon blade with him called Hexling that he constantly resists the influence of, but at the very end of his mission, he gives into it. Not for selfish reasons or for power, but to save his men. Now, what is this mission, you might ask? Well, in the book Shroud of Night, after these Alpha Legionnaires are spat out of the warp, they are found by a war leader of the Emperor's Children, who tasks them with catching a beacon that is on a planet that is currently being fought over. And why is this planet, Sudraka, being fought over? Well, you see, a Psyker has miraculously manifested an ability that causes him to shine through the warp, like a human astronomicon. He is known as the Beacon, and everyone is gunning for him. This planet, being on the other side of the Great Rift, views him as an invaluable resource, and it's the only thing keeping this planet afloat. So the Imperial Guard forces, the Sisters of Battle, and the Imperial Fists are fighting tooth and nail to protect him and the world itself, while the Chaos forces continue to invade, namely the Emperor's Children, and especially the World Eaters, led by none other than Karn the Betrayer. So the Emperor's Children task the Alpha Legion, led by Caesar, to retrieve the beacon, get it out, and evacuate the planet before Karn really gets in and destroys everything. Near the end of the book, the Alpha Legion have encountered Primaris, they've encountered Saint Celestine, they have seen Chaos warbands going bonkers, it's just been insane. And they are allowed to leave with the beacon by Celestine herself, who basically nods to them to take it at the very end, after Cassar has accepted this demon blade. And they leave with it saying, you know what, screw those Emperor's Children, we're gonna go. So that's what they, as Wildcards, who I do generally deem loyalist, have to the table. This beacon, the Emperor's Children hunting them, Cassar and his demon blade, and his veteran warband. One thing that does need to be considered, though, is that in the event of a civil war between the Alpha Legion factions, there is a thread of commonality, and it's not just the fact that they're all Alpha Legion. It's the fact that they all don't like the Imperium in its current form. Solomon Akura believes the Imperium is deeply corrupt and should be torn down no matter the cost to humanity. Occam believes that the Imperium is a rotted shadow of what the Emperor truly intended, and that he wants to tear it down in order to bring about the Imperium that the Emperor promised, one where Xenos empires are all destroyed, and corruption is stamped out, which is actually ironic considering he himself is a worshipper of the Emperor. And Cassar hates the Imperium because of more personal reasons. He views the worshippers of the Emperor as little better than those who worship chaos. They're all the same to him, ignorant and deluded. He's really only in it for himself and his men, the people who are closely around him personally. But I do, however, believe he would fall in line with Omegon should he return, because he is a Crusade Heresy Era Marine. So while characters like Solomon Akura would want everything burnt to the ground to start anew or just let it all go to ruin, and for the Emperor to be completely cast down as a false idol, people like Occam, Cassar, and Omegon, in my opinion, would want the Imperium reformed and brought back to what the Emperor truly intended it to be at the beginning. They are reformists compared to Solomon's revolutionary stance. And honestly, time and again, we have seen reformers and revolutionaries, even though they should be on the same side, come to blows and tear at each other's throats in times of civil conflict. It's actually what lost the Republicans the Spanish Civil War, of all things. Now, this video has gone on way longer than it should have, and I am absolutely exhausted physically and mentally from working on this one. So I'm gonna cover these last two elements in the same breath, as well as a brief update about authors. Part of the reason I'm also mentioning these two right at the same time is because they're both written by Dan Abnett, one of the most active writers of Black Library, and someone who is basically seen as the godfather of Alpha Legion lore and Warhammer lore in general. Because not only has he written so many of the most important books in the series, he has also written the book Legion, which really kicked off the new Alpha Legion lore as it is. The first thing being the Alpha Legionnaires who may still be under the Imperial Palace. Because in the End in the Death Volume 1, we learn that there are many Alpha Legionnaires in stasis below the Imperial Palace who were put there and given those code words to be activated. We, as of yet, do not know what happens to them. Now, by the time this video goes up, they may well have been dealt with, because The End in the Death Volume 2 is out right now, but I've been avoiding spoilers like the plague. So by the time this video is out, they may have already been completely wiped out and dealt with. However, if they aren't, and please God let they not be, they could still be there 10,000 years later. Why, you might ask? You would think they would have been taken care of by now. Somebody would have noticed by now. It's been 10,000 years. Well, not necessarily. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, those things can be overlooked, as everyone is joyous, everyone's focused on pushing out the traitors and scouring them, and most of the space between the Imperial Palace is not allowed to be traversed or examined. The Adeptus Mechanicus has what is described as a dread grip on the Imperium, because they are so stiff about what can and can't be looked at. Much of the forbidden technology that exists below the Imperial Palace is never to be touched or looked at, even though it could probably do a lot of good. That is something the Inquisitor Erasmus Crowell actually laments in the book The Carrion Throne by Chris Wraith. So there is absolutely a good chance that these Alpha Legionnaires are still there, just waiting to be activated with a code word. And should that code word be Xenophon, loyalty to the Emperor, they would immediately flock to Omegon's banner, because they literally wouldn't have any choice to do so. Funnily enough, some people actually view this as evidence towards the Cypher is Omegon theory, because that would make sense why he's so intent on getting to the Imperial Palace and getting near the throne room, so he could have access to those Alpha Legionnaires if they're still there. Again, The End in the Death Volume 2 is out now. Who knows what's happened? Well, the people who have read it would know, but I wouldn't as to recording this. Hoping they're still there. Please don't spoil anything in the comments. Like, please, do not. And now, the last one here is the Marine known as Death Row, who is an Alpha Legionnaire identifying himself as Alfarius in the Dan Abnett book Bequin, Pariah, and Penitent. In these books, he is part of the retinue of Inquisitor Eisenhorn, one of the most well-known and beloved characters in all of Warhammer, a rogue inquisitor who has gone from a Puritan to a full-blown Xanthite, with his own demon host that he views as a trusted ally. It's honestly awesome how far he's come and where he's gone as a character. But in his new retinue, one of them is an Alpha Legionnaire in blank grey armor named Deathrow. And funnily enough, in the book The Serpent Beneath, there is, at the very end, a moment where Omegon is alone and says, "Think, the third path," and views a blank grey suit of armor in his personal quarters. So for this reason, some people believe that the Marine Deathrow, who is basically just doing the bidding of Eisenhorn, well, seems to be doing the bidding, you never really know with the Alpha Legion, is Omegon himself. I think that's a bit much. I see where the theory comes from, but I just think that's a little too out there. However, I wouldn't be surprised if we could reliably count Deathrow as a Loyalist, because a Loyalist who uses extreme means that others wouldn't is very much in line with the Alpha Legion way of doing things. Or could be in directly contact with Omegon himself. That could be really cool. Now, for those who don't know, the Pariah and Penitent books are the last trilogy in a trilogy of trilogies, with a few other books on the side, following Dan Abnett's Inquisition series. The first 3 Eisenhorn books, the first 3 Ravenor books, and now the 3 Bequin books. And we should be getting the last one, called Bequin Pandemonium, very soon, because now that Dan Abnett is finishing up The End in the Death Volume 3, and just being done with the Horus Heresy, he'll have more time for that, and he has said the book is coming soon. The whole thing of Deathrow being an Alpha Legionnaire was very much overshadowed by the big reveal that the King in Yellow is very likely named Constantin Valdor, who has been missing since the end of the Heresy, but it is absolutely something I have my eye on, especially given my interest in the Alpha Legion and a possible Alpha Legion civil war that I feel like is coming. Because there's just too much going on within the Legion to not be reconciled, because in my mind there's really no peaceful solution, and other people agree with me. There's even fan art and a fan sort of plotline called Omegon's Wrath that deals with this exact thing. Now, before I end off this video and go nurse my migraine, that's not a joke by the way, my head feels like a basketball full of water, I should note the authors involved here. Now, we already talked about Dan Abnett. He's one of the biggest authors in Black Library, if not the biggest. He has a lot of stuff planned and going on, and we're only going to get more from him in the future, which is awesome. However, the 3 main books I've been talking about, Harrowmaster, Sons of the Hydra, and Shroud of Night, are all kind of different stories. Max Brooks, who writes Harrowmaster, is pretty active and is a generally speaking well-liked and new force in the Black Library community, so we can absolutely see more from him, especially if he wants to carry on Solomon's story, which it really seems like he will. Because Solomon doesn't have the full spear, he just achieved his goal, there could be big things for him should Brooks see it fit to continue his story, and considering how well received Harrowmaster was, that is a good possibility. Now, the other ones, Andy Clark and Rob Sanders, are 2 even more different stories. While Harrowmaster was released in 2023, Shroud of Night was released in 2017, over 6 years ago. So, obviously it's been a while, but it should be noted that Andy Clark on his Twitter has brought the book up in recent years, mentioning that he would like to make a sequel and implying he has some stuff planned. Granted, a lot of these statements are from 2020 or 2021, but still, it's nice to know that he at least has it in his mind. And it's worth mentioning that he is still actively writing for Black Library. He wrote the book Gate of Bones, which was part of the Dawn of Fire series, and a book called Steel Tread, an Imperial Guard book. Now, I haven't read them, but I've heard they're quite good. So all of this does lead me to believe that we could see Cassar again in the future. Rob Sanders, however, I'm really not so sure, because he hasn't written anything for Black Library since 2017. In fact, Sons of the Hydra seems to be the very last thing he did. And it should be noted that he's gone completely dark on Twitter. For the past several years now, he hasn't tweeted anything, his blog isn't very active, I'm not even sure if he's with Black Library anymore. Then again, that doesn't necessarily mean we'll never see Occam again, because he and the Redacted do get a brief shout-out in Harrowmaster, when Solomon Akura is reeling off various Alpha Legion bands, and he mentions that the Unsung, with Cassar, told him to, quote, go eat the end of his bolter. He apparently never heard back from the Redacted or Occam, and was actually happy about that because he views them as just a bunch of kids playing pretend. So while we might get sequels for Shroud of Night and very likely Harrowmaster, don't hold your breath for another Sons of the Hydra book unless a different author decides to pick up those characters. But what do you guys think? Do you guys believe that these various elements will have to come to a head for an Alpha Legion civil war? finally giving the Legion some purpose and direction? Or do you think some of these plotlines are just gonna fade away, and maybe only Solomon Akura will take the lead, or Omegon will just never return, or maybe he will return and just completely bat Solomon out of the spotlight? Maybe you'd prefer for all of this to go nowhere, and for the Alpha Legion to stay mysterious and disjointed and fractured as opposed to the other Chaos Legions. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. Please subscribe if you have not already done so, and until then, I will see you in the next video.